Tonight, 80 years later,
isolationism was not the answer 80 years ago and is not the answer today.
Can America continue the mission of D-Day and save the world once again? Panic rooms are back.
Why now?
I think that there's a political aspect to it.
The new fortifications to keep yourself safe at home. Can they protect you from America's latest crime wave? And stand by your man. The real story behind Hunter Biden and his wife's affectionate walks into court. Welcome to the fairest show on television. President Biden issued a dire, really dire warning today. Stood before the few living veterans of D-Day, and 80 years later said once again the world sits in peril, that we are at a crossroads, that once again we are letting the forces of evil rise, and we are forgetting the lessons of the 1930s. And to be fair, he is absolutely 100% right. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Russia threatens to plunge Europe and thus America through NATO into another ground war. China's rise and promise to reunite Taiwan by force, plus take over Southeast Asia, presents an existential threat to America's economy and primacy in the world, and threatens a major war in the Pacific. An Iranian nuclear weapon, which they are well on their road to, would give the ultimate power to religious fanatics who routinely chant death to America. We need to pay attention. We live in dangerous times. Dangerous times require serious people.
The price of unchecked tyranny is the blood of the young and the brave. In their generation, in their hour of trial, the Allied forces of D-Day did their duty. Now the question for us is, in our hour of trial, will we do ours?
Mr. Biden's advisors said they wanted this split screen. They talked about it. They set the expectations. We are not making the comparison. They did. They wanted a Reagan-esque moment. Reagan's moment, point to hoc, 40 years ago. That speech is defining not only of Ronald Reagan, but of the times. Reagan totally redefined and laid out for the world America's role.
We in America have learned bitter lessons from 2 world wars. It is better to be here ready to protect the peace than to take blind shelter across the sea, rushing to respond only after freedom is lost. We've learned that isolationism never was and never will be an acceptable response to tyrannical governments with an expansionist intent.
After that speech, on so many levels, there were no questions about Reagan, about his age, his vision, his leadership, his purpose. Reagan went on to win a landslide re-election, win the Cold War, and become one of our great presidents. And to be fair, only 40 years from now, maybe, can we fairly judge Mr. Biden's speech. But arguably, right now, the world is far more dangerous than when Mr. Biden took office. To be generous, it is arguably more dangerous. I would argue it is more dangerous. So we must take stock now. Eisenhower said before D-Day to the men who boarded the boats and the aircraft that the eyes of the world are upon us. I would add to that today, on the 80th anniversary of D-Day, the eyes of those who died for our freedoms that we've enjoyed for the past 80 years, the eyes of those who died on D-Day are upon us as well. Joining us now, former senior advisor to Hillary Clinton, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Philippe Reines. It's good to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give you the softball first. Your grade for Biden today?
An A. An A. I'll tell you why. Because he's there and he's laying this out in terms of history. And I'll maybe answer your next question in terms of your lead-in. We should absolutely judge Joe Biden on what he did today, and I don't need 4 years to do it.
Or 40. You don't.
Or 40.
Okay.
Because here's the thing. We have not had World War III, and the reason we haven't is because of NATO, which eventually was born out of the alliances that were formed after World War II.
And the argument you're making is that Joe Biden supports NATO and that Donald Trump...
The argument I'm going to make is that Donald Trump does not support NATO. He wants to pull the United States out of NATO.
Oh, come on.
No, hold on. He has roughed up our NATO allies. He is upset with them. Our NATO allies do not feel that we are in it with them.
Okay, let's just we're going to get to this point. We're going to get to this.
The people who kept the peace are the ones that are surrounding Joe Biden today, that got this done 80 years ago, which is utterly amazing in the course of human history. And they're the ones that Donald Trump, for 4 years, scared the bejesus out of.
Well, to be fair, they scared the bejesus and they spent a lot more money on their own defense. But I want to move back to where President Biden is today. He's the one who set the comparison between himself and Reagan, said, I wanted a Reagan moment. You know what expectations mean. You were there in 2016, the expectations game between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Typically, the Biden team lowers expectations. Why did they raise them so high to a moment that so many look back on and say that changed history?
First of all, can I pretend that I don't remember the Reagan speech, even though I kind of sort of do?
No, you can't. But you get points for honesty. Because you're honest, then you can pretend you don't remember it.
I didn't read the full Politico story about them
the
putting
Gipper
it out
moment,
there, them wanting it. I'm imagining that they regret whoever said that because, like you said, that is not a good bar to put out there.
Yep.
Whether it's the Gipper or whether it's anyone else. I think the moment that Joe Biden had, looking at it right now, looking at the split screen, are two presidents talking to the world. And when President Trump had done that, including at this very site or nearby a few years ago, he turned to his chief of staff, John Kelly, and he said, why would I go to a cemetery
filled with losers? That was about World War I. That was World War I. And look, it's been a huge problem for Donald Trump. But we're not talking about Donald Trump. We're talking about
more than a huge problem.
Hold on, we're talking about Joe Biden. And when we put the split screen up,
hold on, between two men.
I understand, but
it's not Ronald Reagan or Joe Biden.
You put the split screen up.
Yep.
Okay. And you actually read the words. There's very similar words, and they kind of.
Well, Reagan wins the hair war,
right? And Reagan. And to be fair to Peggy Noonan, who wrote the Reagan speech, Biden cribbed a few of the ideas. Okay, you probably would not pass a plagiarism test if I was in college.
I actually know President Biden's speechwriter on this. I know how much he put into it and how important this was to him. Just as an aside, look at the people behind Joe Biden. I read today that 300 people who served in World War II, Americans, die every day.
No,
and I think he takes that with him.
Okay, fair enough. Hold on. Let me just get to this, though, because before he headed overseas, the Wall Street Journal, as you know, dropped the big story behind closed doors. Biden shows signs of slipping.
Cited to Kevin McCarthy.
Hold on. And look, it's a cheap shot. You don't hit the president before he's headed overseas.
I mean, it's not a cheap shot. It's sourced to two Republicans.
Okay, hold on. And then, as if to prove, President Biden, who rarely talks to the media far less than any other president, far fewer news conferences, far fewer availabilities. They put him out to ABC News, David Muir, for what I would arguably would say was a pretty softball interview. And this was one of the clips they put out. Take a listen.
Let me ask you about what Vladimir Putin said last night about this authorization of American weapons inside Russia. He said the supply of high-precision weapons to Ukraine for strikes on Russian territory is direct participation in this war. He went on to say that this is the way to serious problems and again talked about Russia's nuclear capabilities. Does that concern you?
I've known him for over 40 years. He's concerned me for 40 years. He's not a decent man. He's a dictator, and he's struggling to make sure he holds this country together while still keeping this assault going.
40 years ago, just to add some facts to the conversation, as you know, and you're nodding along, Vladimir Putin was a KGB officer. So if Joe Biden knew him, there's some other explaining that needs to go on.
But again, it's a choice between two men. 40 years ago, Donald Trump was a playboy in New York, living off his daddy's millions, going bankrupt time and time again.
The point is that Joe Biden says things over and over and over again. 9 mistakes in one speech. He said he was in Detroit for the pandemic as vice president. He was actually there for the Great Recession. He says, I knew Vladimir Putin 40 years ago. 40 years ago, Vladimir Putin was a KGB officer.
I think it's ironic
Democrats Democrats are going to have to reckon with this, don't they?
But I think it's interesting because we're holding up Ronald Reagan as the model here, and I understand that, and I held him in high regard. I wasn't old enough to vote for him at the time, but Ronald Reagan had his share of slips too. I mean, we voted for these people when they were the age they were. Ronald Reagan was the oldest president when we voted for him. Donald Trump was the oldest president when we elected him. Joe Biden was the oldest president. What is it that we're shocked by? That they are not remembering every numbers to the thing?
Okay.
Joe Biden knows the important part here, which is not to let Vladimir Putin go.
Okay, hold on. So this brings up
in terms of expectations. I would think the Republican Party and Joe.
Okay, so the expectation
should stop with the Joe Biden can't stay awake stuff. Because that is going against them.
That is, and you think about the expectations game is important.
That's going to hurt them.
It's going to be extraordinarily important in the debates.
Yeah,
and you know more about debates than just about anything else.
Keep it up.
You played Donald Trump.
If they want to keep this up, that's fantastic.
Hold on. This is him in an interview with David Muir. How do you set the expectations for June 27th, the next most important thing for Joe Biden after D-Day? How do you set the expectations for a guy who routinely gets a lot wrong?
Well, I mean, that's a comical question. You get upset every time you ask me a question, I go to Donald Trump. But again, this choice has been two guys. At least when Joe Biden gets something wrong, he's not lying through his teeth. When Donald Trump gets something wrong, it's because he's making it up. So, yes, when we're watching the screen that night, there's going to be a lot of...
Come on, Joe Biden's the guy who said...
lie?
No, Joe Biden's the guy who says, I had an appointment to Annapolis. There's no record of it. He's the one who said I got arrested and marched and did all these things.
If the election comes down to who lies more in November, that would be fantastic. But I think in terms of what you're asking on June 27th, it could be a debacle. Their last debate, the first debate, which, interestingly, I did the math. These guys haven't seen each other. The last debate was in October of 2020 in Nashville. When they see each other in Atlanta on the 27th, that is 1,344 days. Right. That's a lot of time in between. They hate each other. That first debate in 2020, they were talking over each other. Joe Biden had to tell him to shut up, man.
No, and it was terrible for Donald Trump.
And it was terrible for Donald Trump. It was terrible for us. Except it worked out for Joe Biden.
There you go.
Hopefully that'll be the same case.
Fair enough. Still ahead, panic rooms are on the rise. What it says about America, that we all seem to want to lock ourselves behind fortified walls. And then there were 4 or 6 or 8. Not who to pick for vice president, who not to pick for vice president for Donald Trump when we come back.
Biden's order is not a border security plan. It's a concession to the fact that he has lost control over our border. He's totally lost control over the border, and it's a really dangerous place. He is conceding death, and he's conceding defeat at the border. On day one of my administration, I will be rescinding Crooked Joe's outrageous executive order.
Donald Trump held his first campaign event since his felony convictions. He had a town hall for the youth group Turning Point USA in Phoenix, Arizona. Current polls show Donald Trump leading the state by 4%. He lost it by 10,000 votes to Joe Biden in 2020. Trump focused on the border, inflation, and crime. He did not speak to getting any closer on a vice presidential pick. Hugh Hewitt, radio talk show host, I should say, worldwide and world-renowned radio talk show host, Hugh Hewitt, is with us. I feel silly sometimes, like we're doing the campaign's work here, because they leak a few names, as they did today, to outlets about, hey, we're getting financials on these 8 people and their disclosure forms. Then they deny they leaked on it, and then they wait for the response to sort of judge it, almost like it's the call-in meter on American Idol's 800 line.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about trial balloons. In fact, the New York Times, in their profile of Senator Cotton last week, actually used the headline, trial balloon. And that's what this is a trial balloon. And as I look at the names, I say each of these are friends with the former president. Each of them know the former president. They've campaigned with the former president. And they are all very, very sound Republicans that would, there's no one from the far ranges of the party. You don't see any MAGA warriors out there. You see all pretty mainstream people. There are only 2 veterans on the list, J.D. Vance and Senator Cotton. Cotton is Army, Vance is Marines. They both fought in Iraq. You got Doug Burgum, of course, who has been much touted. Have you heard that, Leland? There's a lot of Doug Burgum.
Oh, yeah.
talk.
I've heard a lot of Doug Burgum talk. I've heard a lot of Ben Carson talk. And then we've all heard the Glenn Youngkin talk, but he's not on the list. So who knows? This is what I think is interesting. And you brought this up. None of them are really that big of outliers. And my buddy Isaac Shore over at Mediaite wrote a piece. What they said then, ranking Trump's VP picks by how brutally they once trashed him. Does that matter at all?
No, because Donald Trump realizes that everybody's got a memory that's even worse than Philip Rein's or President Biden. Nobody remembers anything, nor do they care about anything. And by the way, I got to tell you, did you give Philippe a cane? Because he danced like Fred Astaire when you played him that clip. Joe Biden missed Vladimir Putin by 20 years. That was really, I was stunned. I hadn't seen that clip yet. But Philippe does a nice job of tap dancing around. Look, the only one on here who I just don't think makes sense is the nicest man on there, Dr. Ben Carson, brain surgeon extraordinaire, wonderful Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. He's 72.
Yeah, no, look, and there's the one thing about Ben Carson, though, is he doesn't upstage Donald Trump and is unable to in any way. There's another way to look at this, right? Almost the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, something John McCain certainly did in 2008 with his pick of Sarah Palin. Take a listen.
You know, they say the difference between a hockey mom and a pit bull? Lipstick.
It worked great with the base, and it cost him 8 points. Who shouldn't Donald Trump pick?
Well, he shouldn't pick whoever Steve Schmidt and Nicole Wallace suggest, because they're the ones that foisted Governor Palin onto John McCain. Look, you said it. Do no harm, number one. I do not think he should pick Byron Donalds, because he's new and he's young and he's exciting and he's going to run for governor in Florida. But he's in a controversy right now, the Jim Crow controversy, which has been totally misrepresented. But nevertheless, you don't need controversy. You need someone who can go on Meet the Press, Face the Nation, talk with Leland Vittert, go on to Meet the Press, whatever it is, and not make a mistake, drive home the message, and do well in a vice presidential debate with Kamala Harris. I think Senator Cotton, Senator Vance, very easily done.
I'm going to put the betting odds up real quick. I'm going to put the betting odds up. This is how much it is. If you bet this amount, you get $1 is the way the predicted odds work. All right, who are you going to put your money on?
I'm putting my money on Burgum. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
I do believe contrasting personalities matter a great deal. And Doug Burgum
is a great point.
As was said on the Hill before we came on, they talked about the 3 eyes. It's actually the 5 eyes. It's inflation, immigration, Israel, the infirmity of Joe Biden, and the injustice done to Donald Trump. The guy who contrasts most sharply is either Doug Burgum or Tom Cotton. Tom is, of course, young, not as young as Elise Stefanik or JD. They're 39.
I'll give you one more with Doug. I'll give you more and more with Doug Burgum. He's rich, which is something that Donald Trump likes a lot. Well, self-made. Hugh, we got to run, but thank you. We appreciate it. It's good to see you. All right, and thanks for watching as well. How do you keep your sweet dreams from turning into a nightmare? How about turning your bedroom into a panic room? Just lock yourself behind a steel door and bulletproof windows. We'll show you the people doing it next.
Now we have to ask ourselves, will we stand against tyranny, against evil, against crushing brutality of the iron fist? Will we stand for freedom? Will we defend democracy? Will we stand together? My answer is yes, and only can be yes.
President Biden this morning at the 80th commemoration of the D-Day invasion, the 80th anniversary. You can see the missing man formation fly over the American cemetery. On this day in 1944, 150,000 Allied soldiers stormed 5 different beaches of Normandy, a bloody sacrifice that turned the tide and began the liberation of Western Europe. Tonight, we remember the words of General Dwight Eisenhower in his message to the brave troops who carried out Operation Overlord.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you.
Missouri Senator Eric Schmidt attended the commemoration today and joins us from France. I know it's your first trip to Normandy, which is always a special one. What we think of when we hear Dwight Eisenhower's words and the confidence there given to the men because they loaded the landing crafts and their aircraft for the night jump into Normandy? He had in his pocket, literally, a message saying that he had withdrawn his forces, the operation had failed, and he alone was taking responsibility. He threw the message away a couple of days later, and a very eagle-eyed officer pulled it out of the trash can and saved it for humanity and for history. I guess what my question is that when you're there and you're walking the beaches and you've seen what you've seen over the past couple of days, do you understand now better why D-Day was such a coin flip?
You do. I mean, the terrain itself, Leland, is difficult. You've got high cliffs. The defenses that the Nazis put in place in the water on the beaches made it very difficult, particularly on Omaha Beach. And the day earlier, they didn't move forward because of the weather. Eisenhower got some reports that there was going to be a window on June 6th. And as you said, nothing was certain about this. I think we look back now and we know that, World War II, we were victorious. Those young men liberated a continent, saved the world. But so much was in the balance on that day. It was really the fulcrum of World War II, the bloodiest war in human history. And so the people who courageously stormed those beaches in the face of all that gunfire, all those huge nests of machine gun fire come raining upon them, were heroes. And I think it's really important that we never forget that. We never forget that. Right. And it's 80 years. It's a couple of generations later. I'm the grandson of a World War II veteran, and it was really important to be there today.
You're the grandson of a World War II veteran. We have the picture. I am as well. My grandfather was at D-Day, I think, +3 or 4, and then went through Western Europe. He, like so many, and I'm sure like your grandfather, didn't talk about it. They didn't tell stories because it was about the men who were still there, who were buried, and who you visited today at the cemetery in Normandy. And it's for us to make them proud and for us to fulfill their dreams of a free country and a free continent and a free world. President Biden today made the point, offered the warning, that we are at this crossroads once again, the most dangerous time since World War II, and that once again the march of authoritarianism and the infatuation with dictators is on the rise. You think that's a fair comparison?
Well, I think, look, America has always stood out as an exception to that. I mean, since the beginning of time, there have been people who want to aggregate and exercise power in authoritarian ways. And I think it's important to remember what Reagan said, right, which is that freedom is only, one generation away from extinction. Yep. So every generation has a call. But I think that greatest generation, who we were celebrating today, deserves that kind of recognition. Leland, there were some of those veterans who were up there on the stage today are over 100 years old. And I got to be honest, teared up when they were receiving this honor from the French president and from, all of America represented there today, thanking them for that courage. I couldn't help but think that as 80 years ago that day, they just wanted to get through that day, right? Like my grandfather, your grandfather, ultimately in World War II, they just wanted to get home and live their lives and build a family. I'm sure they could never have imagined that 80 years later they'd be on that stage, but there they were, heroes and the folks that we can be really proud of. And for me, as the grandson, as I mentioned, to be there now as United States Senator on behalf of our country, it was a bit of a surreal experience for me personally, but I think it's most important. And as a side note, I just was randomly going around and introducing myself and thanking a lot of the veterans. And I ran into someone who was in the 44th Infantry Unit, the same unit my grandfather was in, which I think you got a picture up there right now. We had a conversation. It was, I felt like my grandfather kind of maybe ushered him to me and made that introduction. And what a great guy he was.
I love it. I'll say this, and you're going to experience this if you get some time to go around Normandy. The locals there all lived under the Nazis, and certainly the kids of that generation and the grandkids have such an appreciation for America and for what freedom really means and the cost of it and the price paid by Americans. It's amazing to hear their stories of American GIs moving through just after D-Day. Senator, I think your grandfather, who was just trying to get through the days of World War II, would come back and be awfully surprised and awfully proud that his grandson was back there as a U.S. Senator. Congratulations.
Well, thanks, Leland. And your grandfather, I'm sure, feels the same way about you. Thanks for having me on tonight.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That's a clip from the movie Panic Room. It helped popularize the idea of safe rooms, fortified areas of your home to provide shelter during an emergency or a home invasion. But mostly they were just for the rich. People were going to be kidnapped. Panic rooms now are gaining popularity amid fears of crime for the rest of us. They're no longer steel-walled boxes with walls of TV screens, but they're bulletproof, and some of them are even soundproof to keep people from being able to break in or hear what's going on inside. NewsNation senior correspondent Brian Enton. Knowing it's Brian, I'm guessing he's in a panic room right now.
Close
there
to
he
it,
is.
Leland. We're at fortified and ballistic security. This is the Panic Room showroom. This is where you come if you want a panic room. Anywhere in the country, they do it here. California, I'm told, is the most popular spot. This big door, you'd never know it because it's got the wood on the outside, but this is a panic room door. You open it, very, very heavy, basically like a bank vault. And if you spin around, you can see how thick it is. It's bulletproof. The locking mechanism, there's several different locks, again, like a bank vault, and it's very, very big. So they will actually put this on your bedroom or the front door of your house and basically secure it. You don't go in a little panic room anymore. You just make your house or your bedroom a panic room. You have windows that are thick, bulletproof windows. This is interesting. This is made in Vegas. They put it behind the drywall. It blocks all of the bullets. They're making these doors here for people all over the country. This is actually going to celebrities' house, and it's got this, kind of like with your phone. You put your face up to it, and then it automatically unlocks. So all of this is obviously expensive, Leland, but you mentioned it's becoming more common with the middle class. I'm told they can do a scaled-down panic room for your bedroom, make your bedroom totally secure so nobody can get in. The cost would be anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000. You can stay in your bed, call police, feel safe. And again, this is becoming a real concern, I'm told, especially places like California, worries about crime and sort of political instability right now.
Yeah, for sure. And you think about the videos that we've all seen of what happens in people's homes that used to be safe neighborhoods. Brian, thank you very much. We had a lot of thoughts this week about D-Day. We wrote about them in War Notes. That's our newsletter that comes out every day, warnotes.com. Sign up for free, and you will get our thoughts at 4:05 Eastern. We'll also see you on social media. Every day, Hunter Biden's wife walks alongside as he heads into his felony gun trial. Here's the video. What is she trying to tell the world about her husband's case but can't say? Sometimes the strongest thing in the world is silence. There's the emotion, there's the feelings. We look at President Biden as he walked through the gravestones at the American cemetery that is sovereign U.S. soil in France. In important moments, the body language often reveals what words do not. So here's President Biden earlier talking about the importance during his address to the Normandy heroes of alliances.
What the Allies did together 80 years ago far surpassed anything we could have done on our own. It was a powerful illustration of how alliances, real alliances, make us stronger. A lesson that I pray we Americans never forget.
Body language expert and author of Snap, making the most of first impressions, body language, and charisma, Patty Wood joins us now. There it was, right? The little wipe of the nose.
Right. And that was a blip from his baseline. So it was a really great tell, and specifically anchored to what he said. He's talking about prayer and alliances. And it's when you're very stressed, the nerve endings in the tip of your nose, around the edges of your ears, the upper lip, are rich in nerve endings, and they fire and they begin to itch. And so he was self-comforting right there as he felt the need to emphasize the importance of alliances and his need to pray about it. And it was a tell that he doesn't know if that's enough, that he's concerned. And specifically, it was interesting to me because I've watched him speak.
How do we know he was concerned about whether that's enough versus concerned that the expectations for this speech were so high, in the words of Dwight Eisenhower, the eyes of the world are upon him?
It was the only time he did it during the entire speech. And also, my baseline of him in other speeches, he's done that twice when he was talking about the allies in terms of what's going on in Israel. So it lets me know that the particular issue of allies and the strength of the allies is of concern to him, because it's the only time he's done it, and he's done it more than once.
Fair enough. This is why you are the expert. Next question for you. Not the president, but the president's son, Hunter Biden, and his wife have been showing up to court every day. Hunter Biden is there for his felony gun charges. Obviously, there's no cameras in the courtroom, but we do get to see him walk in and out with his wife. We'll play that.
Busy though. Busy small, but busy. There you go.
Kind of looks like
thoughts?
I've been analyzing them a lot for the media, and specifically her body language. I find it really fascinating. She's choosing today and in other days a very light color palette. She has free-flowing hair or hair up in ponytail, very casual, the big casual sunglasses, all indications that she wants to come across as cool, calm, and collected. I liken it to that sort of Melania cool girl look. I'm above this. It's not bothering me.
Whenever I think about Melania and the cool girl look, I always think about the jacket that said, I don't really care, do you?
Yes.
I don't know why I can't get that out of my mind, but I guess if you're going to your husband's felony gun trial, you can't wear that jacket.
No, but you can be cool girl, and you can show affection, and they've shown affection. They've held hands. At that time, she has his arm around him.
Does it look genuine to you or forced?
If you look at a sequence of photographs and a sequence of videos, which I've done, so I've gotten lots of baseline, he's much more emotional. He's much more concerned, but he looks at her, and there are times where she smiles and comforts him in these little walks into the courtroom, and that speaks well of them as a couple. I like that. I like to see when one person helps the other non-verbally.
Yeah. Look, and you have to make the comparison. We just have to, that for the weeks that Donald Trump went to court every day in New York, Melania was nowhere to be found. So there's something to be said there.
That's a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Jimmy Kimmel. We don't watch Jimmy Kimmel very much, if at all, but Kamala Harris was there. Obviously, the demographics of Kamala Harris enthusiasts and Jimmy Kimmel have a large intersection in the Venn diagram. Here she was.
The reality is cheaters don't like getting caught. and being held accountable. But, the reality is, let's just fast forward to, again, November. I think the American people want to know that there is a president who believes they are accountable to the people.
And who's allowed to travel overseas.
And also a president who the people can count on.
How comfortable is she there?
Oh, it's so interesting because she came on this show with the biggest, most sincere smile I've ever seen her show. And I've seen her in person. I've met her. She is a very happy person in one-on-ones and with people she knows. That's the smile she came on the show with. And as he got further into the detailed questions, see how her legs are folded over and she's collapsed down more, and even her hands are folded over. So I think she got more put on the spot than she thought she might in this situation, but she can go from happy to serious in a heartbeat. She's smart. She can do that. But she definitely felt the need to defend the president. And she did a sincere job. I mean, her voice aligned with her.
I get that, but why all of a sudden, if you sincerely believe this, and it's hardly to argue that Jimmy Kimmel has ever done a hard-hitting interview. This is about as friendly territory as you get if you're Kamala Harris. And look, that's late night TV. That's his job, okay? But why would she be shrinking back in a situation that would be seemingly so non-threatening?
I think she didn't. She came on the show. I don't think she expected to have to go there. And so you can see where she's pulling back and closed down and feels put on the spot about being asked about the president and feels the need to defend him. And my guess is that she's also asked that question a lot about him.
Yeah, and look, she talked about people who are under a lot of stress. Patty, we always love having you. Thank you. You help us make snap decisions, to borrow the title of the book, and we will see you sometime soon. Thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure.
All right, President Reagan's legacy is firmly established now, and with good reason. But when he left office, not everyone had a favorable opinion. We look back, 20 years since the Gipper died, why he is finally getting his full due. This week marks 20 years since we lost Ronald Reagan, admittedly one of, if not my favorite president. This weekend, NewsNation will remember our 40th president with an extraordinary look back. Reagan, Portrait of a Presidency, airs Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern. And since this is also the 40th anniversary of Reagan's famous Point-to-Hoc speech at D-Day and the D-Day celebrations, here is a look at part of what to expect from the Reagan documentary.
In his first term, he delivered a moving speech in honor of the 40th anniversary of D-Day.
The air was dense with smoke and the cries of men, and the air was filled with the crack of rifle fire and the roar of cannon. At dawn on the morning of the 6th of June, 1944, 225 Rangers jumped off the British landing craft and ran to the bottom of these cliffs. Their mission was one of the most difficult and daring of the invasion. Climb these sheer and desolate cliffs and take out the enemy guns. And in seizing the firm land at the top of these cliffs, they began to seize back the continent of Europe. 225 came here. After 2 days of fighting, only 90 could still bear arms. Behind me is a memorial that symbolizes the Ranger daggers that were thrust into the top of these cliffs. And before me are the men who put them there. You were here to liberate, not to conquer. And so you and those others did not doubt your cause. And you were right not to doubt. You all knew that some things are worth dying for. One's country is worth dying for. And democracy is worth dying for because it's the most deeply honorable form of government ever devised by man. All of you loved liberty. All of you were willing to fight tyranny. And you knew the people of your countries were behind you.
The whole documentary airs Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern. Joining us now, acclaimed military historian, author of The Unvanquished, Patrick O'Donnell, also author of Dog Company, The Boys of Point-to-Hoc, the Rangers who accomplished D-Day's toughest mission and led the way across Europe. And there it is. He will hold it up for us in just a minute. This is the moment, right? This is your moment that you chronicalized. Why did Reagan choose the Boys of Point-to-Hoc as the vessel, really, to make his case in 1984 for re-election, for staring down the Soviet Union, for the goodness, if you will, of America?
Past is present, Leland. This represents the iconic moment of D-Day. This is the toughest mission of D-Day. These 225 men have to scale a 90-foot cliff under direct machine gun fire, grenade fire. There's IEDs ringing the side of the cliff. And, as soon as the landing craft doors open on their boats, they are peppered with MG-42 machine gun fire, and they have to somehow scale this cliff. And it's mission impossible. And they were dedicated 100%, 1,000% to accomplishing the mission, which is, really extraordinary. It's about personal agency. It's how a single individual can change the course of history or bend and shape an entire invasion. And they understood it, and they were willing to sacrifice their lives for freedom and democracy. They changed the world. And, this is a time when Reagan made that speech at the very height of the Cold War, and it's absolutely essential to how we were able to defeat the Soviet Union and communism.
In retrospect, you look at Ronald Reagan as now one of the most popular presidents. When he left office, he only had a 53% approval rating. You've studied so many different military missions and then zoomed out and looked at the commander-in-chief who was behind them in different military units. I'll give you just the last 30 or 40 seconds. Has it taken now 40 years for us to understand 40 years to understand the significance of the Rangers at Pointe du Hoc, and now 40 years later to fully understand the greatness of Ronald Reagan and the significance of what he did through the Cold War?
It's all about, Leland, it's all about leadership. And that is a indispensable quality that, transcends everything. This mission transcends history. It's Reagan at the time is such a great leader, in line with George Washington or Lincoln. His leadership, his ideas on how to defeat the Soviet Union are absolutely essential. And he puts these things in motion to make it happen.
Well, and then it did, in the same way the leadership that you write about, Dog Company, the boys at Pointe du Hoc, and then obviously the Ronald Reagan speech to the same name. Patrick O'Donnell with us. Thank you, Patrick. We really appreciate the time.
Leland, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll see you soon. Saturday night, NewsNation Films presents Reagan, Portrait of a Presidency. You're going to hear from the 40th president, in his own words, relive the moments which have defined history. And in retrospect, so many of those moments of Ronald Reagan's truly changed the direction of our country. A lot of times, most times you would say, for the better. Saturday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, here on NewsNation. Then I'll pick up our coverage with George Will and a special guest as well to take a look back at the documentary, some of the most important points, and dig a little bit deeper. I'll see you back here tomorrow night, Friday. I will also see you bright and early tomorrow morning, my last day of Morning in America. So that's 6 a.m. Eastern. In the meantime, here's Chris.